The radio crackled with static as Lieutenant Marcus Chun pressed his back against the concrete wall of what used to be a grocery store. Broken glass crunched under his boots as he adjusted his position, sweat dripping down his face despite the cool morning air. The abandoned city of Fallujah stretched endlessly around his six-man reconnaissance team, every shadow potentially hiding death. Radio check, base, Chen whispered into his headset, but only silence answered back. The communication blackout had started 3 hours ago, right after they'd spotted the insurgent movement in the northern district. Now they were completely cut off, 18 minutes away from their extraction point according to his GPS, but it might as well have been 18 miles. Sergeant Dave Rodriguez crouched beside an overturned shopping cart, his rifle trained on the street corner where they'd last seen movement. The former gang member from East LA had found purpose in the military, but right now his street instincts were screaming danger. LT, we got at least 20 hostiles between us and the extraction zone, he reported quietly. They're setting up positions like they knew we were coming. The intelligence had seemed solid when they'd started this mission at dawn. Reports of weapons caches hidden in the abandoned residential district had brought them deep into enemy territory. The city had been evacuated months ago, leaving behind a maze of empty buildings that provided perfect cover for insurgent operations. What should have been a simple reconnaissance had turned into a deadly trap. Corporal James "Tank" Williams pressed himself against a doorway, his massive frame making concealment difficult. The former football player from Alabama had been nicknamed Tank not just for his size, but for his ability to punch through enemy lines. Today, however, brute force wouldn't save them. Motion sensors picking up movement from 3 directions, he reported through gritted teeth. They're boxing us in. Private First Class Miguel Santos, barely 19 years old, clutched his rifle with trembling hands. The kid from Phoenix had joined the army to escape poverty, but nothing in basic training had prepared him for this level of isolation and fear. His job was communications, but with their radio dead and satellite phones jammed, he felt utterly useless. The team's medic, hospital corpsman second class Jennifer Walsh, checked her medical supplies for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. The Navy medic attached to this Army unit had seen combat before, but being trapped with limited medical resources made every potential injury a death sentence. She counted 18 morphine auto-injectors, enough bandages for maybe 2 serious wounds, and a prayer that they wouldn't need any of it. Staff Sergeant Kevin Ghost Morrison lay prone on a rooftop 3 blocks away, completely unaware of his team's desperate situation. The master sniper from Montana had been positioned as overwatch for the mission, but the communication breakdown meant he had no idea his brothers were fighting for their lives. Through his scope, he watched the empty streets, following his orders to maintain position and provide cover for the extraction that was supposed to happen in 18 minutes. Down in the urban maze, Lieutenant Chun made the hardest decision of his military career. "We move now or we die here," he whispered to his team. "Rodriguez, take point. Tank, your rear security. Walsh, stay in the middle with Santos. We go building by building, using cover and concealment." The first block went smoothly. Too smoothly. Rodriguez's instincts, honed by years on dangerous streets before the army, told him they were being herded like cattle. The insurgents weren't trying to kill them yet. They were positioning them for a perfect ambush. Every empty doorway they passed could hide an enemy fighter. Every pile of rubble could conceal an improvised explosive device. As they reached the intersection of what used to be Main Street and 2nd Avenue, Rodriguez held up his fist, signaling the team to freeze. Through a gap in a bombed-out building, he could see muzzle flashes. The insurgents were moving into final position, cutting off their last escape route. "LT, we're walking into a killing field," Rodriguez whispered urgently. "They've got the high ground, overlapping fields of fire, and nowhere for us to run. This ain't random. Someone gave them our route." Lieutenant Chun felt his stomach drop. The possibility of betrayal within their intelligence network wasn't new, but experiencing it firsthand was terrifying. Someone had fed their mission details to the enemy. Their reconnaissance route, their timing, maybe even their extraction point. The insurgents had turned the abandoned city into a giant trap, and his team had walked right into it. Private Santos tried his radio again, desperately cycling through different frequencies, hoping to reach anyone who could help. The static remained constant, broken only by occasional bursts of Arabic that made his blood run cold. The enemy was coordinating their movements, tightening the noose around the trapped Americans. Hospital Corpsman Walsh noticed Santos hyperventilating and placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Breathe slow and deep," she whispered. "We're getting out of here. The LT has a plan." She wished she believed her own words, but keeping the youngest team member calm was part of her job. 3 blocks away, Ghost Morrison adjusted his scope and caught movement in his peripheral vision. Something was wrong. The streets that should have been empty for their extraction were filled with armed figures moving with military precision. His training kicked in as he began counting targets, marking positions, calculating distances. 27 insurgents visible from his position, probably more hidden in the buildings. But, without communication, Ghost couldn't warn his team or call for backup. He was trained to follow orders, and his orders were to provide overwatch until the designated extraction time. Abandoning his position could leave his team vulnerable if they managed to reach the extraction point. But staying put while they walked into an ambush felt like betrayal. The sniper from Montana had grown up hunting in wilderness where a single mistake meant death. He'd learned patience, precision, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions in seconds. Those skills had made him one of the military's most effective long-range marksmen, capable of eliminating targets at distances that seemed impossible to other soldiers. Down in the urban maze, Lieutenant Chin's team had taken shelter in an abandoned pharmacy. The smell of decay and destruction filled their nostrils as they huddled behind overturned shelving units. Through broken windows, they could see insurgent fighters moving into position on rooftops and in doorways. 17 minutes until extraction, Chin announced quietly, though everyone knew the pickup zone was now impossible to reach. The helicopter would arrive on schedule, wait the mandatory 2 minutes for stragglers, then leave without them. Standard operating procedure designed to prevent losing aircraft to rescue attempts. Sergeant Rodriguez studied the tactical situation through a crack in the pharmacy's front window. "LT, I count at least 8 shooters with direct line of sight to our position. They're waiting for something. Maybe reinforcements, maybe orders. But they could have taken us out already if they wanted." The realization hit Lieutenant Chun like a physical blow. "They want us alive," he said grimly. "Prisoners for propaganda videos. That's why they haven't opened fire." The thought of capture, of torture, of being used as tools for enemy propaganda motivated every member of the team more than fear of death ever could. Tank Williams checked his ammunition count. 47 rounds left, LT. "If we're going down, we go down fighting." The big soldier's voice remained steady, but sweat stained his uniform despite the cool morning temperature. Hospital Corpsman Walsh opened her medical pack and began distributing extra ammunition from the supplies meant for emergency surgery. "Everyone takes what they need," she said quietly. "Leave nothing useful for the enemy." The unspoken message was clear. They weren't planning to survive this engagement. Private Santos finally abandoned his radio and picked up his rifle with newfound determination. The scared teenager from Phoenix had found something stronger than fear, the brotherhood of soldiers who refused to abandon each other. "What's the plan, LT?" he asked, his voice steady for the first time all morning. Lieutenant Chun looked at each member of his team. Rodriguez, the street-smart sergeant who'd found family in the army. Tank, the gentle giant who'd use his body as a shield for any of them. Walsh, the medic who'd risk everything to save a wounded soldier. Santos, the kid who'd grown into a man in the space of one terrifying morning. And, somewhere out there, Ghost Morrison, the sniper who didn't even know they needed saving. "We make them pay for every inch," Chin decided. "Rodriguez, you know urban warfare better than any of us. What would you do if you were them?" The sergeant from East LA smiled grimly. "I'd wait until we got desperate and made a mistake. Then, I'd take us apart piece by piece. But there's one thing they don't know about us." "What's that?" Lieutenant Chin asked. "We ain't planning to make mistakes," Rodriguez replied, chambering around in his rifle. 15 minutes remained until their scheduled extraction, and Ghost Morrison had finally made his decision. Orders or no orders, his team was in danger, and he was the only one in position to do anything about it. The sniper from Montana began calculating wind speed, distance, and target priority. The abandoned city held its breath as two forces prepared for a battle that would determine whether 6 American soldiers would return home or disappear forever in the maze of empty buildings and broken dreams. Ghost Morrison pressed his eye against the scope, his breathing controlled and methodical as he surveyed the tactical nightmare unfolding below. The abandoned city spread out like a deadly chessboard, with his trapped teammates as the prize, and 27 visible insurgents moving into final position. His orders said to maintain overwatch until extraction, but orders hadn't anticipated this level of betrayal and coordination from the enemy. The sniper's training had been brutal and comprehensive. Fort Benning Sniper School had broken down dozens of candidates, leaving only the most mentally resilient and physically capable. Ghost had endured weeks of psychological pressure, sleep deprivation, and impossible shooting challenges. The instructors had taught him that a sniper's greatest weapon wasn't his rifle, but his ability to remain calm under pressure and make perfect decisions in impossible situations. Through his scope, Ghost watched an insurgent commander positioning his men with military precision. The enemy leader wore a distinctive red keffiyeh and moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Ghost marked him as target priority 1, but taking the shot would reveal his position and potentially doom his team if he missed any of the coordinated response. 3 buildings away from the pharmacy where his team was trapped, Ghost identified a machine gun nest being set up on a rooftop. The crew was positioning their weapon to have overlapping fields of fire with 2 other positions, creating a crossfire that would cut down anyone trying to escape. The gunner, a thin man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek, was adjusting the weapon's elevation. Target priority 2. In the pharmacy, Lieutenant Chun made the decision that would define the rest of his military career. "We don't wait for them to make the first move," he told his team quietly. "Rodriguez, you take Santos and move to that abandoned gas station across the street. Create a diversion. Make them think we're trying to break east. Tank, you and Walsh set up a base of fire position here. I'll move north and try to flank them." Sergeant Rodriguez looked at his lieutenant with respect and concern. "LT, that's a suicide mission. You'll be outnumbered 20-1 out there. Better than sitting here waiting to be captured," Chin replied. "Besides, Ghost is out there somewhere. If anyone can tip the odds in our favor, it's him." Private Santos checked his rifle one final time, his hands no longer shaking. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into something else, determination. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I'm ready," he said simply. Hospital Corpsman Walsh distributed the last of her medical supplies among the team. "Santos, you take the combat gauze. Rodriguez, extra tourniquets. Tank, the morphine auto-injectors." She kept only the bare minimum for herself, knowing that in the coming fight, others would need medical attention more than she would. Ghost Morrison had been tracking the insurgent movements for 43 minutes, building a mental map of their positions, weapons, and likely tactics. His military training had taught him to think like his enemy, to anticipate their moves before they made them. The insurgents were professional, disciplined, and well-equipped. This wasn't a random ambush by untrained fighters. This was a carefully planned operation by experienced soldiers. The sniper's greatest challenge wasn't the distance to his targets or the wind conditions affecting his shots. It was the mathematical reality that he had to eliminate enough enemies, fast enough, to give his team a chance to reach the extraction point. 27 visible targets, probably more hidden, and only 14 minutes until the rescue helicopter arrived and departed on schedule. Ghost's rifle was a custom-built M24 sniper weapon system, chambered in 7.62mm NATO. He carried 20 rounds of match-grade ammunition, each bullet capable of eliminating a target at ranges exceeding 800 meters. In perfect conditions, he could fire one accurate shot every 8 seconds. The mathematics were stark. Even if every shot was perfect, he couldn't eliminate all visible targets before his team was overrun. But Ghost Morrison hadn't survived 3 combat deployments by playing the odds. He'd succeeded by changing the rules of engagement, by turning his enemies' advantages against them. The insurgents' coordination and discipline, which made them so dangerous, also made them predictable. They would follow their plan, react according to their training, and that predictability was something a skilled sniper could exploit. In the pharmacy, Lieutenant Chin's team prepared for what they all knew might be their last mission. Tank Williams positioned himself behind an overturned counter, his rifle trained on the most likely avenue of enemy approach. The big soldier from Alabama had always been the team's anchor, the one who held the line when everything went wrong. Today would be no different. LT, movement in the building across the street, Tank reported quietly. Looks like they're positioning for a coordinated assault. We got maybe 5 minutes before they come at us from multiple directions. Sergeant Rodriguez and Private Santos moved toward the pharmacy's rear exit, preparing for their desperate dash to the gas station. Rodriguez had survived gang warfare in East LA by understanding that sometimes the only way out of a bad situation was through it. Santos, when we move, you stay low and follow my exact path. Don't stop for anything. Don't look back. Just run and shoot. Hospital Corpsman Walsh took position near the center of the pharmacy, where she could provide medical support to either team. The Navy medic had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, but this level of isolation and enemy superiority was beyond anything she'd experienced. Still, her oath was clear: provide aid to her brothers in arms, regardless of personal risk. Ghost Morrison made his final calculations and began the most important shooting sequence of his military career. Wind speed, 8 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature, 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, 43%. Range to first target, 430 meters. The insurgent commander in the red keffiyeh was positioning his men for the final assault, unaware that death was watching him through a telescopic sight. The sniper's first shot would have to be perfect. Not just accurate, but strategically devastating. Taking out the commander would disrupt enemy coordination, but it would also reveal Ghost's position and bring return fire from multiple directions. He would have perhaps 30 seconds of confusion before the insurgents adapted to his presence and began systematically hunting him. 12 minutes until extraction, Lieutenant Chun announced to his team. The helicopter was already airborne, following a predetermined flight path that would bring it to the extraction point exactly on schedule. The pilots had no way of knowing that the landing zone was compromised, that they were flying into what might become a trap for both air and ground forces. Ghost Morrison controlled his breathing, his heartbeat, his entire existence narrowing to the small circle of magnified reality visible through his scope. The insurgent commander was giving hand signals to his men, coordinating the final assault that would overwhelm the trapped Americans. Ghost's finger found the trigger, applying the precise pressure that his training had made automatic. The physics of long-range shooting demanded perfect timing. The bullet would travel for nearly half a second before reaching its target, during which time the insurgent commander could move, turn, or step behind cover. Ghost had to predict not just where his target was, but where he would be when the bullet arrived. In the pharmacy, Sergeant Rodriguez whispered his final instructions to Private Santos. Remember, kid, it ain't about being brave. It's about doing your job when everything goes wrong. You stick with me, follow my lead, and we'll make it to that gas station. Then, we give the LT the diversion he needs. The young soldier from Phoenix nodded, his rifle ready, his mind focused on the task ahead. Santos had joined the army to escape poverty and find purpose. He'd found both, along with a brotherhood that made risking his life feel like honor rather than fear. Tank Williams adjusted his position slightly, his massive frame providing cover for Hospital Corpsman Walsh while maintaining clear fields of fire. The former football player had learned that protecting teammates required both physical courage and tactical intelligence. Walsh, when this kicks off, you stay behind me. I'll be your shield. The Navy medic checked her pistol one final time. As a medical professional, her primary role was saving lives, but, in combat, that sometimes meant taking them. Tank, I've got your back. We all go home together, or nobody goes home. Lieutenant Chun moved toward the pharmacy's north exit, preparing for his solo flanking maneuver. The officer from California had led men in combat before, but never in circumstances this desperate. Command school had taught him that leadership meant making hard decisions under pressure. Today's decision was the hardest of his life. Ghost Morrison's world condensed to a single moment of perfect clarity. Wind speed calculated. Distance measured. Target's movement pattern analyzed. The insurgent commander was 3 steps away from completing his preparations, 3 steps away from ordering the assault that would kill 6 American soldiers. Ghost's finger completed its rearward pressure on the trigger. The M24's firing pin struck the primer with mechanical precision, igniting the gunpowder that would propel a 7.62 millimeters bullet through the morning air at 2,800 feet per second. The shot that would either save his team or doom them all had been fired. Time seemed suspended as the bullet crossed the distance between life and death. In the pharmacy, Lieutenant Chen's team heard the distant crack of their sniper's rifle and knew their battle for survival had begun. 11 minutes remained until extraction, and Ghost Morrison had just announced to every enemy fighter in the abandoned city that American soldiers were coming for them. The bullet struck the insurgent commander's center mass, dropping him instantly and sending his red keffiyeh tumbling across the rooftop. Ghost Morrison was already cycling his bolt action, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering his second round before the enemy leader's body hit the ground. Through his scope, he watched the immediate confusion spread through the insurgent ranks as their carefully coordinated assault plan dissolved into chaos. But Ghost's relief lasted only seconds. Muzzle flashes erupted from 6 different positions as the remaining insurgents opened fire on his team's pharmacy stronghold. The sniper's shot had saved his brothers from a coordinated assault, but it had also triggered the very battle he'd hoped to prevent. In the pharmacy, Tank Williams felt bullets punch through the concrete wall inches from his head, sending chips of debris across his face. "Contact front," he bellowed, returning fire with controlled bursts toward the nearest muzzle flash. The big soldier's rifle bucked against his shoulder as he laid down suppressing fire, buying time for his teammates to react. Lieutenant Chun abandoned his flanking plan as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions. The enemy's coordination might be broken, but their numbers and positions still gave them overwhelming advantage. "Rodriguez, abort the diversion," he shouted over the gunfire. "We consolidate here and hold until Ghost can thin them out." Hospital corpsman Walsh pressed herself against the pharmacy's rear wall, her medical training warring with her combat instincts. 3 blocks away, she could hear Ghost's rifle firing in a steady rhythm, each shot representing another eliminated threat. But return fire was intensifying around the pharmacy, and it was only a matter of time before someone on her team needed medical attention. Ghost Morrison had entered what snipers called the zone, a state of heightened awareness where time seemed to slow and every shot felt predestined. His second target was the machine gunner with the scarred face, who was swinging his weapon toward the pharmacy. Range, 380 meters. Wind correction, 2 clicks left. The insurgent never saw the bullet that ended his threat. Private Santos crouched behind an overturned shelf, his rifle trembling in his hands as bullets shattered bottles of medicine around him. The teenager from Phoenix wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to be anywhere except trapped in this abandoned building while trained killers tried to murder him. Instead, he forced himself to focus on Sergeant Rodriguez's earlier words, "Do your job when everything goes wrong." Sergeant Rodriguez had taken position near a blown-out window, using the frame for cover while engaging targets across the street. His gang warfare experience had taught him to think tactically even in chaotic firefights. "Santos," he called out, covering fire on the white building, 2nd floor. "I'm moving to better position." The young private leveled his rifle and began firing controlled bursts at the windows Rodriguez had indicated. Santos couldn't see specific targets, but his suppressing fire would force the insurgents to keep their heads down while his sergeant maneuvered. It was his first real combat engagement, and muscle memory from countless training exercises took over. Ghost Morrison's third shot eliminated a sniper who'd been positioning himself to target the pharmacy from an elevated position. But the return fire was getting closer to his rooftop hide site. Concrete chips exploded around his position as insurgents tried to locate him through muzzle flash and sound. He had maybe 2 more minutes before they zeroed in on his exact location. The master sniper began moving after each shot, using the rooftop's ventilation equipment and debris for concealment. His training had emphasized that a static sniper was a dead sniper. Keep moving, keep shooting, keep the enemy guessing. But the rooftop was only so large, and eventually he'd run out of covered positions. In the pharmacy, Lieutenant Chun realized their defensive position was becoming untenable. Bullets were coming from too many directions, and the concrete walls wouldn't stop heavy rifle rounds much longer. "We need to move," he shouted to his team. The gas station Rodriguez spotted. "We bound by teams, covering each other's movement." Tank Williams nodded, understanding the maneuver without detailed explanation. Military training had taught them to function as a unit, each member anticipating what the others needed. "Walsh, Santos, you're with me. Rodriguez, you and the LT move first. We'll cover." Hospital Corpsman Walsh grabbed her medical pack and prepared for the most dangerous 100 meters of her military career. The gas station was across an open street that provided no cover from multiple enemy positions. But staying in the pharmacy meant certain death as the insurgents closed in from all directions. Ghost Morrison's fourth shot took down an insurgent who was positioning a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The RPG would have demolished the pharmacy and everyone inside it. But eliminating the threat cost Ghost precious seconds, and insurgent marksmen were beginning to bracket his position with increasingly accurate fire. The sniper from Montana made a tactical decision that violated every rule in the manual. Instead of maintaining his concealed position and providing long-range support, he abandoned his hide site and began moving closer to the battle. If his team was going to run a gauntlet across open ground, they'd need covering fire from someone who could see all the threats. Lieutenant Chun and Sergeant Rodriguez exploded from the pharmacy's front entrance, sprinting across the debris-strewn street toward the abandoned gas station. Insurgent fighters immediately shifted fire toward the running Americans, but Tank Williams and Hospital Corpsman Walsh provided covering fire that forced the enemies to take cover instead of aiming carefully. Rodriguez's street survival instincts guided him around potential obstacles and danger points as he and Lieutenant Chun covered the distance in record time. Both soldiers dove behind the gas station's concrete wall just as bullets began chipping away the edges of their cover. They'd made it across, but their teammates were still trapped. "Santos, Walsh, move." Tank Williams bellowed, providing covering fire with his rifle while the medic and youngest team member prepared for their sprint. Private Santos looked terrified but determined as he checked his rifle one final time. Ghost Morrison was now only 2 blocks from the action, close enough to see individual insurgent faces through his scope. His 5th shot eliminated a fighter who was lining up on Santos and Walsh as they prepared to run. The sniper's new position gave him better angles on the enemy, but also made him more vulnerable to return fire. Hospital Corpsman Walsh and Private Santos burst from the pharmacy like runners leaving starting blocks. The Navy medic's physical fitness training served her well as she sprinted across the open ground, her medical pack bouncing against her back. Santos stayed close beside her, his legs pumping with adrenaline-fueled speed. Bullets kicked up dust around their feet as insurgent fighters tried to cut them down during their exposed run. But Ghost Morrison's covering fire from his new position forced the enemies to shoot hastily instead of taking careful aim. His 6th shot eliminated a sniper who'd been tracking Walsh's movement. Tank Williams maintained steady covering fire until both runners reached the gas station safely. Then, the big soldier prepared for his own desperate dash across the kill zone. As the team's heaviest member, he'd be the slowest target and, therefore, the most vulnerable. But Tank's football training had taught him that sometimes you had to lower your head and push through the opposition. The soldier from Alabama emerged from the pharmacy at a full run, his rifle held across his chest as bullets whined around him. Ghost Morrison's 7th shot eliminated an insurgent machine gunner who was tracking Tank's movement. But return fire was intensifying from multiple positions as the enemies realized they were facing a skilled sniper. Ghost Morrison felt a bullet tug at his sleeve as he lined up his 8th shot. The insurgents had located his approximate position and were concentrating fire on his building. Concrete exploded around his shoulders as he squeezed the trigger, eliminating another threat to his team's escape. Tank Williams dove behind the gas station's protective wall just as an explosion erupted where he'd been standing. An insurgent had thrown a grenade at his running form, but the blast was too late to catch its target. All 6 Americans were now consolidated at the gas station, but they were still 3 blocks from their extraction point with 10 minutes remaining. Lieutenant Chun assessed their tactical situation through a gap in the concrete wall. Between their position and the extraction point, at least 15 insurgent fighters remained in positions that commanded the route. Ghost's accurate shooting had eliminated 12 enemies, but the survivors were now alert and ready for the Americans' final dash to freedom. Ghost is changing the game, Rodriguez observed, watching their snipers' position shift again to avoid return fire. But we're still outnumbered and outgunned. How do we get from here to the landing zone? Hospital Corpsman Walsh checked each team member for wounds and found only minor cuts from concrete debris. Everyone's mobile, she reported. But we can't stay here much longer. They'll flank us or bring up heavy weapons. Private Santos spotted movement in a building between their position and the extraction point. Sergeant Rodriguez, armed fighters setting up in the blue building. Looks like they're trying to block our route. Ghost Morrison had been tracking the same movement through his scope. His 9th shot shattered a window where insurgents were positioning another machine gun. But his new firing position was taking heavy fire, and he was running low on covered locations from which to engage. The master sniper made another decision that would have horrified his instructors. He began moving toward the extraction point himself, leapfrogging between buildings to stay ahead of his team's movement. If he could eliminate threats along their route while staying mobile, he might be able to clear a path to safety. Lieutenant Chin studied the route to their extraction point, calculating distances and timing. 8 minutes until the helicopter arrives, he announced. We move as a team, building by building. Rodriguez takes point, Tank brings up the rear. Walsh and Santos in the middle. I'll coordinate movement. The gas station's concrete wall suddenly erupted in chips and dust as insurgent fire intensified. The enemy fighters had regrouped after losing their commander and were pressing their numerical advantage. Several muzzle flashes were visible from windows that provided overlapping fields of fire. Sergeant Rodriguez spotted a path through the urban maze that offered the most cover. LT, we can use the alley behind the blue building, then cut through that bombed-out restaurant. It's not perfect, but it beats running down the main street like targets in a shooting gallery. Ghost Morrison's 10th shot eliminated an insurgent sniper who'd been drawing a bead on the gas station. But the return fire was getting more accurate as the enemies triangulated his position through sound and muzzle flash. A bullet creased his left shoulder, sending a line of fire across his upper body. The sniper from Montana ignored the wound and kept moving. His job was to get his team home alive, and personal injury was irrelevant compared to that mission. Ghost's 11th shot cleared another threat from his teammates' intended route. Moving, Lieutenant Chun called out as his team abandoned the gas station's protection and began their final push toward extraction. They moved in tactical formation, covering each other's advance while Ghost Morrison provided overwatch from his mobile position. The abandoned city echoed with gunfire as 6 American soldiers fought their way through an enemy-controlled urban maze, supported by a wounded sniper who refused to let them die on his watch. 7 minutes remained until their helicopter arrived, and Ghost Morrison still had 9 bullets left in his magazine. The battle for survival had become a race against time, with freedom waiting just 3 blocks away if they could stay alive long enough to reach it.